earliest visitors to the cave, they had a problem. You see, they got down into the cave, and after they went a few feet in, they couldn't see anymore. Does anybody know why?
No sunlight.
There's no sunlight. So what was the cave like down there?
Dark. Pitch black.
It was pitch black. Good answer. They couldn't see a thing down there. Well, they weren't going to be able to travel safely through the cave like that, so they went down to the river and they gathered up cane reed and they tied it in bundles of 5 or 6 pieces like this, tied it up with grass, and they laid it out to dry. Now, when they went into the cave, they wouldn't take just one of these. They would get a leather strap or a piece of bark that was pretty long, and they'd get about 40 of these things, and they'd put them all together and they'd carry those in on their back. And when they got too dark to see at the entrance, they'd light these on fire and they'd head into the darkness. Now, as they walked along, this torch would slowly burn down. It would get shorter and shorter and shorter. Does anybody know about how long this would burn before it got too short to hold?
Like 2 inches.
Like 2 inches? Do you know how much time, though, it would burn before it got too short?
Maybe about an hour.
Maybe about an hour, not quite that long, but that's a good guess. It would burn about 45 minutes. And then it would be so short, it's no fun to hold on to anymore. Now your torch is about to burn out. You got 40 more torches on your back. What are you going to do?
Light them.
You're going to light another torch, exactly right. But then they would do something else too. They'd do something that was really smart and kept them safe. They'd light one torch, sure, but they'd take another torch off their back and they'd lay it on the ground inside the cave there. Because if it took one torch to get this far in, it's going to take one torch to get from that point back out to daylight. So they would go through the cave and they would light a torch and they'd lay a torch down, and they would light a torch and they would lay a torch down. And when they lit their last torch, well, it was time to go, and they'd make their way out of the cave and they'd pick up the torches that they had left behind, light those, and use those to see their way out. That way they were never in the dark. Because if you're in the dark in the cave, there's only one thing you can do safely. Anybody know what that is? I want to keep that a secret for a little while. I'll tell you in just a little bit, though. Now, the earliest visitors to the cave used these torches, and they explored Mammoth Cave for about 3,000 years, from 5,000 years ago to 2,000 years ago. And that's how they got through the cave, and they explored 12 to 14 miles of the cave with just these lit sticks. I've been in places in the cave where you can barely squeeze through. And we find the ends of these torches. Somebody crawled through there thousands of years ago on their bellies carrying a little torch. There's a place in the cave, it's not far at all from a tourist trail, but it takes an awful long time to crawl in there, and at the very end of it there are 2 torches like that, and they're crossed, stuck down in the dirt. Apparently that's as far as they thought you ought to go years ago, and one of the fellows from Science and Resource Management just discovered that a few months ago down inside the cave. Now, 2,000 years ago, these earliest visitors to the cave, they quit going down there. But we don't know why. Maybe things changed up here on the surface. Maybe they decided this wasn't the best place to live. We know they were farmers by that time. And it's kind of rocky and hilly around here, but just a few miles to the north across the Ohio River, the soil is black, the land is flat. Maybe it was just easier to farm somewhere else, but they left. For 2,000 years, nobody came in the cave. Now, in the late 1700s, well, visitors started coming back to the cave. And when they came back to the cave in the late 1700s, they used flashlights to get through the cave. Did they?
Yes.
No, they didn't use flashlights. They would use fire, but they used a different kind of fire. They would use lanterns like this. Now, this is called a New England open-face whale oil lamp. Now, that's a lot of words. What it means is this lamp doesn't have any glass on it. Now, you may have noticed as you came into Kentucky, did you see lots of whales here? Have you seen any whales at all since you got here? Yeah, we don't have many whales in Kentucky. So whale oil, well, that's not really a good thing to burn in a lamp. What they would use instead is lard, because we've always had lots of that, and we still have quite a bit of it left. These are called lard oil lamps too. So if you'd been on a tour 200 years ago, say, or 150 years ago, well, your guide might have gotten up very early in the morning and fixed breakfast for you. He might have cooked some bacon. And when the bacon was finished cooking, he just scraped that off and poured into the lantern. Put a wick down into it, and lo and behold, that lamp will burn. Now, if you took a tour back then and you were around this lamp all day long, well, you were going to smell like bacon too. Or you'd smell like burning bacon, which doesn't always smell very good. But either way, after a short tour of 6 or 7 hours or a long tour of 12 or 13 hours, you were going to smell in such a way that every hound dog in the area was going to be your best friend. For the longest time, these are the sorts of lamps they used. Now, here's something I just found out recently. This historic part of the cave didn't have electric lights installed, let's say, until the 1950s. So they were still using replica lights like this. In fact, this is one of those lights that was used on a tour up into the 40s and 50s. These lanterns were used after that, though. They were used from about 1860 to about 1950, but not by the visitors. These were used by tour guides and other people who came through the cave. This is also an oil lamp, but this one's not open-faced. It's actually got a glass bulb on it. Now, you had to have something pretty good to burn in here in order to use glass, because if you use bacon grease, well, you're not going to have a light for very long. See how this has got all black? That's from the smoke from that fire inside. If you use something like bacon grease, you're not going to have a lantern, you're going to have a handheld heater. It's going to be really hot, but it's going to get all smoky and no light's going to come out of it. Now, moving forward, they used other sources of light, and what we used for quite a while in the 60s and 70s, when we're off the trails after the electric lights were inserted, we started using flashlights. Flashlights were invented a long time ago. As a matter of fact, there's a war that started 100 years ago today, and that's when flashlights were invented. That was World War I. They were in places called trenches. They would stay in holes in the ground to be safe, and to see their way through night, they used flashlights. Today, when we explore caves, well, we use items like this. This is a helmet with a headlamp on it, and this is a helmet and a headlamp that actually gets used fairly often. This is Heather, and this is her headlamp that she uses while she's going through the cave. Now, this light is adjustable. It's got about 4 different settings on it for brightness. You have to remember to be polite too, so this is actually something that if you walk up to somebody in the cave, you want to make sure to look down just a little bit so you don't blind your fellow cavers. But this is what folks use now to get safely through a cave. It's a long way from something like this. Now, when we started out today, though, I promised you that I was going to tell you what this is for. But I'm going to do one better than that. I'm actually going to show you what this was for. As you go through the cave and you're carrying a lantern like this, you're not going to see very far. That's going to light up an area maybe 15 or 20 feet from you. And even if you've got a group of 30 or 40 people with 10 lanterns, you're not going to see very much at all. So what the guides would do is create things that they called torches. Now, this is a very high-tech piece of equipment. It's made from an old, worn-out undershirt, and what they would do is wrap this into this tight little coil like this, then they'd soak it in kerosene. And then, if they came to a big room in the cave, they'd pull this out of a little tin they carried on their side, and they'd hang it on the end of this stick. This is a torch throwing stick. And this knotted up piece of rag, that was a torch. Now, once it was hanging on the end here, they'd take a lighter and they'd light it on fire. Kind of didn't burn really well. It'd sort of get started, so they'd sit here and twist it a few times, and when they did, it would make this big whooshing noise. And then they'd lean back and kind of like casting a fishing rod, they would throw this torch up into high areas in the cave that you couldn't see with your lantern. And that would light up the area. Now, when they threw these torches, they would stick all over the place up on the cave, and wherever they landed, they'd leave big black marks. That's why we don't throw them anymore. They do too much damage down in the cave. But if you came here before about 1991, you could still see the guides throw torches. We're not going to set these on fire today, but I want to give you the chance to see what it was like to throw one of those torches. So we're going to take these 2 hula hoop rings here up to a flat place on the other side of the visitor center. And I'm going to give you a chance to see how well you can throw one of these torches today. Yes. Alrighty. So if you want to come with me, we're going to walk up here the hill here. The first trick, and I'm going to have you stand back from me a little bit because I don't want to hit anybody on the head and I don't want to set anybody on fire. Not really, because these aren't going to be on fire. But there's 2 tricks that really make this work. The first is that you don't want to swing this as hard as you can. And you don't want to go back too far, because if I go back too far, that happens. That's not very good. Especially if you've got a whole group behind you watching you throw the torch. So you want to kind of keep it even. You don't want to throw too hard. And you just sort of want to flick your wrist a little bit. Like that. Now you're trying to get them into those rings if you can. Doesn't matter if it goes in or not though, because here's the second trick I want to show you. And this is the most important part of throwing a torch. Is wherever it goes, yell bullseye. Bullseye! See, I got it exactly where I want it. And that's what the guides would do when they were throwing torches. No matter where it hit, they would yell bullseye, and that way everybody would know that they had hit exactly what they wanted to in the cave. Now I want to give you guys a chance to try this out. There's an awful lot of us, so I'm going to give each person a chance to throw twice. I'm going to start with you right here. Now folks, back up just a little bit with this.
Just like casting your fishing pole.
Yeah, just like casting a fishing pole. See if you can get in that blue one.
Bullseye.
Wow. Good shot.
Do it again.
All right. Yeah, it was that torch. All right.
Good job.
Thank you.
I can't believe I made it too so far.
Get up there.
Don't burn her.
No.
Get up there, guys.
Up there. Where? Go after him.
Hard.